Does voice work here? I'm not sure voice is working.
Awesome. I can hear you now. I also brought Speakeasy as well, so I have my whole transcript in that. Am I at a good volume where I'm understandable? Okay, so let me know when I should start. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Laura Gilmour, and I'm a sessional instructor at MacEwan University in Edmonton, Alberta. Although I teach undergraduate psychology courses, my research background is actually in educational psychology, and my dissertation work focused on a classroom workshop for elementary school children on social problem solving. This project was also a classroom workshop, but for the purpose of teaching undergraduate students AI self-editing. The current project was funded by a Scholarship of Teaching and Learning grant from MacEwan University in Edmonton. This is a story about an eager, relatively new PhD who received my first grant on my own, post-degree, that did not have any supervisor. This is a different experience than a dissertation. I've always been fascinated by AI since childhood, and even within Second Life as someone who loves writing and storytelling. I enjoyed creating interactive scenes with bot personas of villagers. I realized from that how much human input it takes for AI to behave well and give useful output. Correct these slides because for some reason it's there we go. We're going to go back to the beginning of this. I love PowerPoint. It does this in my classes occasionally too. Recently at MacEwan, there has been some cool speaker series about the role of AI in medical technology. I've been too busy with wrapping up my term to attend these talks, but I gather that the AI will be used alongside clinical judgment, not in isolation from human use. However, when people think of AI in a classroom, they think of someone telling a program to write a paper and the program writing a paper that earns the student a good grade without the student having to comprehend the material. This slide here shows a story that happened not far from where I live about 5 years ago. Self-driving cars are awesome tools for things such as parking, or if someone gets a little dozy at the wheel, they can remind the person to take a break. However, they are not intended for napping while taking a drive down the Trans-Canada Highway. I always show this image to students at the start of each term when I introduce my classroom AI policy. First of all, I'm not an English teacher. I'm not teaching grammar or sentence structure. I'm teaching critical thinking, which includes evaluating research in the area of developmental psychology and creating your own ideas from evidence. I encourage the use of software for editing grammar, sentence structure, and organization, and to start the process of referencing. However, like the car dozers, you can't entirely trust the software. You need judgment, not to just copy and paste everything without thinking. If you use Grammarly and don't check it over, it can replace an innocent word with a typo and turn it into an embarrassing Freudian slip. I will not repeat any of the examples here, as I've seen in case people have children in the room who are listening, but remember, reference generators can also make up bogus URLs or titles. I found an article once about feline nasal passages in the middle of a reference page for a student's developmental psych papers. Using Scribber to make references, no problem. However, you need human knowledge of references to check it over. Whenever a new technology comes to the classroom, there is both excitement and fear. I was talking to an older colleague the other week who has been a long-term educational mentor, and she mentioned that when she was in high school in the 1980s, her teachers feared that calculators would make knowing math unnecessary. That never happened. In some ways, humans are able to do and teach higher levels of math now, as a calculator can do some of the time-consuming heavy lifting or crunching. In the case of the other tech, AI might find the needle in a haystack, such as the one typo in a perfect paper, or the shadow on an x-ray that went unnoticed by a technician who viewed 1,000 normal ones that day. Humans are prone to change blindness. If we see similar things over and over, AI can see attention of as distracted humans. However, once our attention is drawn to our point of interest, the task is on us again, not the AI. As an instructor, this means I can expect a higher skill level from my students, such as papers that are mostly free of spelling and grammar errors and are formatted correctly. I can also grade more heavily on content and critical thinking and less on technical elements. Existing literature on AI in classrooms suggests that AI is useful for student self-study, such as designing their own practice tests or simple editing of writing. This feedback is instant, and if you know what you're doing, you can even have it make up quizzes for you. I try to make myself available as much as possible to students. However, when you have over 100 students, which I do this term, 109 to be exact, there is no way you can meet one-to-one with every student every week and individually teach them concepts. AI will fill in some holes there. It might also help students who have barriers, for example, English language learning disabilities or English language learners who are not related to psychology, which are not related to psychology understanding. So they are able to devote more cognitive resources to learning psychology, critical thinking skills, versus focusing just on the fundamentals of reading and writing and being held back from learning psychology. However, despite its promise in some areas, AI also has some risk. Besides blatant copy and pasting, AI is prone to some errors. For instance, I have a group of students at another campus I teach, and they looked up a brain anatomy term on GTP Google. It incorrectly told them that a motor area of the brainstem was a component of the limbic system, which is an emotional control area. In order to use AI as a tool like this, you need a base level understanding of the subject and be willing to engage in fact checking. In today's information explosion world, this kind of literacy and judgment is needed with almost any media source, and not just AI. In addition, some AI programs create art from copyrighted images or steal direct quotes from written works they are not authorized to quote. There are also privacy concerns about prompts written by the users. Here I show Bloom's taxonomy. AI excels at basic tasks in this taxonomy, but struggles with more complex ones for now. I always try and show my grading rubric for assignments where I allow AI usage to reflect this. That means, for example, that I would put more grading emphasis on content than I would on mechanics and how well students understand and integrate these concepts. That means that a human driver in a car or at the reins of a horse, not the AI driving it. For the current study, I had an online developmental psychology course, second year, and I decided that the students could practice using Copilot, a Microsoft Word add-in for self-feedback on their papers. To be fair, all students in the class experienced both instructor feedback and Copilot feedback. It was a reversal design, as you see, where one got one part of feedback first and the other got the other part of feedback first. Every student did this, whether they opted into the study or not. Ethics required me not to have special treatment of study participants over students. Those who opted in had their drafts anonymously graded by a research assistant who was unaware of which group they were assigned to. I had lofty plans to do repeated measures ANOVA to analyze the results. Well, that's not what happened in reality. Only in my noob researcher's dreams. Only 5 students submitted a first draft of the study. And by that I mean opted in. For the second draft, that number had been reduced to 3 who opted in. Students who tried to use Copilot experienced major technical difficulties, ranging from it not being compatible with the device they used at home, some worked on a Mac or a tablet, and this worked better on PCs, to struggling to get the add-on to integrate with their copy of Microsoft Office. In the end, I sent everyone the output and did the prompt for them. However, everyone in that group was already stressed out and frustrated. And then I found myself teaching them how to judge useful Copilot output, such as avoiding opinions in scholarly writing, versus irrelevant comments, such as asking them to make a results section when they did not conduct original research themselves. A small number of students did my exit survey, and besides saying that the tasks were confusing, even with the additional updates to documents for clarification, these students expressed concerns about privacy of their data. They also expressed concern about more workload. Even if an anonymous draft doesn't seem like much to upload, it's another link on an already too long chain. You'll see what I mean in the upcoming slides. Last week, I realized it was time to stop the study. In a classroom setting, respect and rapport are more important than data. This isn't a lab full of rats or zebrafish learning tasks. I also realized that my efficiency tools were making more work for all of us. I was discouraged and thought that maybe I should cancel my journal reef to the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning Journal, cancel the conference, and just decide that I stink at doing research and should stick to teaching. Thankfully, I didn't do that. I realized from my educational psychology background how important reflection is in teaching, and not just about things that go wonderfully or as planned. I talked to a few more experienced colleagues last week, ranging from my favorite mentor teacher and former research supervisor to the editors of the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning Journal, even some of the folks running this conference. And I realized I still have something to offer, even if it isn't repeated measures ANOVA with a sample size of 60 and statistically significant results. I decided to go back to the literature to see if there was any educational theories on student writing tasks. Just for fun, I decided to ask Copilot about related cognitive, behaviorist, and constructive theories, and it mentioned cognitive load theory. I then went to my university library database, and I found a treasure trove of research on this theory and designing feasible student research assignments. when we are working on a new short-term memory. We can only hold so much information in our short-term memory at a time. For people who are new to tasks, there's a lot more steps. For experienced people, they become automatic. For instance, if you are a driver, I'm not, I never get beyond the parking lot. When you first start driving, you have to think of each step, such as where you put your foot. There are, over time, many of these steps that become automated. I'm not a driver because they never became automated for me. I'm a good instructor, but there's things that everyone is not good at, and writing won't become automatic like this for every second-year student, as everyone has different paths in life. I looked at my assignment rubric again and realized that I was trying so hard to make a critical thinking paper that AI couldn't possibly do. That each of the components of the paper required learning relatively abstract concepts and applying them at the same time. Yikes. It is likely that the idea of uploading anonymous drafts, or even Copilot, didn't even enter the short-term memories of these students. I also noticed that many paper drafts were missing one or more components of these instructions. Before I began teaching, a student and long-term mentors said to me that one of the biggest mistakes of new course instructors is trying to do too much, especially with first and second year students. I thought back to this and realized this is exactly what I did here. This task might take an hour or less for me as a PhD, but was likely a nightmare for many second-year students. What if someone put me on a highway and asked me to drive? As someone with perceptual difficulties. That's how a second-year ESL student or a student with a learning disability might feel when presented with this task. This would be especially stressful if those weren't psychology majors or if they missed out on the fundamentals of writing in the post-pandemic fallout. And as mentioned before, English learners would also find this harder. Even if I kept giving extensive support, spending extra time with students, and allowed for multiple drafts, even if most did well by the third draft, which they did, it was a lot of workload and stress for all of us. Also recently, AI has been portrayed in the media in kind of an apocalyptic light. And there are quite a few unethical uses for AI in the world too, ranging from election interference concerns in multiple countries, to child safety online and harmful algorithms of violent content being targeted towards children. AI hasn't gotten a good rap in the news. Since AI is new and scary to most people, maybe I should focus the task on two things. This is a hypothetical design of what I would do if I made a task like this again for classroom. Learning to use Copilot in Word and using a teacher-provided prompt, maybe have a paragraph that's written in a not-so-scholarly tone, and have students get feedback from Copilot to revise it. Then I've removed the demands of synthesizing a paragraph in analytic syncing and APA formatting and other steps. Too many objectives for one task. Although if students take third and fourth year psychology courses, you could do a more complex task with the upper level students. I can also explore these skills in other assignments such as presentations and infographics, which don't try to integrate AI or APA at the same time. Often gamers or film critics on YouTube use the phrase, "I did this so you don't have to," such as if they tested an extremely unpleasant beta version of a game or watched a bad movie. I'm saying this now about my task this term of grading 60 papers in this course 3 times. I think the students were getting fatigued by the third revision too. I finished this presentation with a short take-home message. If you have a new idea for a study, don't try to do everything at once. Try to find one component of a gap in the literature you can test. Try a pilot study on a small group to see if this is feasible before you waste months and research time and grant money on a large-scale study. Also, if something isn't working, stop right away. Students are much more important than data. Hopefully someday I can do a repeated measures ANOVA on AI self-feedback in the classroom and have a real sample size of 60 or more. Until then, I did this so you don't have to. I will now open the floor to questions or comments. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation. So I anticipate this will be quite useful with third and fourth year students. But I think many of the second years, because second year students in a course like developmental psych, they're a diverse group. And this is their very first time for many of them writing a paper. And I also learned that many of these students come from other faculties. And don't have the same background in second year. Whereas year 3, people specialize. So I think this project would work a lot better if you had people that were sort of on the same page with the discipline. And I would still simplify the task a little bit, and I wouldn't put that many things in a task. I see lots of potential with Copilot, and I'm glad the university has adopted it. About the cognitive load of the year teaching and put that into account with the number of objectives I put in assignments. And yes, I'm not sure 100% how to pronounce your name, but I'm gonna try Hypatia. Tia, that's awesome. Or Taya. But yes, it was interestingly enough that my undergraduate research supervisor and advisor warned me that that was a common thing with first year teachers. And I finished my PhD 2 years ago. And because I was in grad school during the pandemic, I didn't get a lot of opportunity to TA. So I ended up sort of winging a lot of that stuff as I go, having some of my first experiences that many people would normally have in grad school as a new instructor.
All of us, when we first start out, we have great ambitions for our students.
Yes, I think all new teachers are ambitious, and I always think about learning outcomes and how I'm going to prepare the students for the world. And I worry about the fallout from the pandemic and everything students have lost. And I spend a lot of time helping students with writing and helping them catch up. I donate a lot of extra time over my office hours, but there's a limit, and I got to consider that these students have limits too, with taking maybe 4 other courses per term. It's so funny that my advisor warned me about that, and then I go ahead and do it. I think everyone has to try it once. I hope to do it. Next year, I'm actually applying for Sessional Extended, which means that I'll have I'll be offered, a full load of courses if I get it. And then if I apply for a teaching service position, I can continue as part of my service to do research and scholarship of teaching and learning. And then I'll be eligible to apply for research funding again. As a sessional instructor, the ability to apply for grants is limited, but I really do hope to do this project someday again, or to team up with someone else on faculty. And yes, I agree with you on that major stuff. I really like the neuroscience and the psychology. I didn't go further in it because I had a barrier in math. I did a ton of courses in my undergraduate degree, but I didn't specialize in biology or genetics. I teach neuropsych at one of the 2 schools over at Concordia, and I love it, but it would never be my specialty because of my math barrier. But I assume that all students are going to be excited about the brain or research or collecting data and a lot of art. Some of the students, even in 200-year level psychology courses, are not even going to do a 4-year degree. They want to do, let's say, a 2-year diploma to be, a technician in healthcare, which is a super important role as well in society. I mean, my dad's a retired allied health person. My grandmother was a nurse, but it's a different path, for example, than going into academia. Super important, probably even more essential, but they're not going to be as interested in all the geeky stuff because they're more hands-on with the patients. Or if someone's going into early childhood and working directly with children, that's going to be a different set of fish than knowing all the brain anatomy. By the way, my family member who is a retired allied health member loves brain anatomy and is fascinated by it. But so that's just a generalization. And I think also cross-collaboration makes for better research. My undergraduate project, I actually looked at incidents of sexual minority representation of individuals on the autism spectrum. And I collaborated with my undergraduate supervisor, who was a neuroscientist, and my graduate supervisor, who was a speech pathologist in autism. And we ended up with a really interesting correlational study because of 3 different authors. I think even when doing research with students, if students are interested in a topic, having cross-disciplinary collaboration. I love cross-pollination research and get really excited about it. Thank you. It was really fun to come and talk to you today. Do we have any more questions, or should I wrap this up for now? I like Copilot, and I found it useful for editing my documents and finding typos, and I also find Copilot useful for instructor workload tasks, such as if I'm editing an email, and let's say I feel frustrated and I want to make sure the email doesn't convey that. I found that Copilot's really good for that. If I write an email to say, make sure this email is in a friendly tone. Because often you're doing a massive workload at once as an instructor, designing hundreds and hundreds of slides. I've looked at Grammarly as well, and I find both fairly similar. But I like that Copilot is better at providing suggestions if you're trying to generate ideas. I would never have other write a paper for me or trust them 100% because, they come up with a lot of bogus. But where I would find Copilot useful is, let's say I wanted to try to pull the main ideas out of something and condense it. If something was too long, it could provide me with suggestions for reducing word count. So I think it's a little bit more capable than Grammarly, but as I always say to the students, don't trust it for critical thinking. That's when I think it gets into academic dishonesty. However, if I was teaching English, I wouldn't want any of it. But when you're editing papers, you're dealing with the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, and I'm okay with people using it for outlining and editing text as long as the text is their own ideas and they're checking everything. I don't want any CAD and test-ons in my references. Yes, I do that also with emails, and it also makes sure my email is clear. And sometimes if I'm writing something and I want to make sure, like if I'm doing a consent form in a study for parents, and many of the parents are English language learners, I wish I would have had that when I was doing my dissertation for simplifying those consent forms, because you can tell it to rephrase something so it's understandable by members of the general public who are English language learners. And then you can read it over to make sure it makes sense afterwards in case it throws in something bogus. Yeah, so I played around with AI with creative writing when I took some characters from my children's book and actually put them in a virtual homestead in this world. I kept the thing running for about a year until dollar differentiations between characters got too crazy. I may someday have it again. And you could really, like if you develop these note cards that have these 3-page personas for these characters, which of course are expensive in AI tokens, and you could sort of see some of their personality develop based on ideas that you developed in the characters and example dialogues. And this thing would take it further, and it was just fun to see that. And I could see potential for that for example, healthcare or education simulations, where people are practicing skills where you could have characters that would be dynamic. Same here, I actually do, but I have them logged off right now because the tax stuff is crazy. But I love that level of creativity. The bots I actually created in World are actually characters from my that I did for my dissertation research. So I see potential in creativity and simulation as well. So let's say you're training, teenagers in social skills training, and you have characters that act as if they're in a classroom. Or students in education could use something like, the bot children create a classroom case scenario. Such as, a bot who represented a child with attention deficit disorder who was disrupting a class. I could see that being potential for pre-service teachers. Or you would have a bot that represented a difficult parent, or a conversation between a health professional and a parent. Or a rude and disrespectful customer that was a bot that you had to talk down. And those are the type of personas I was playing around with in my virtual town, and I thought, someday I'd like to use this for research. And yes, with AI and books and characters and things, that's one of the things I learned is putting constraints on them so they don't do that. And the only way you can really learn about it is by trying and playing with things, or they'll come up with totally crazy stuff that's off base. But I think it would be cool to do a study with someday with pre-service teachers with classroom problem-solving scenarios. My prompts were super long and used a lot of tokens, but with tokens becoming relatively cheap, that was useful. Same as I teach my students to try to recognize irrelevant outputs, such as in Copilot, if it tells them, as I mentioned in the presentation, to add a section of their paper that has nothing to do with the assignment, or add something that doesn't belong in a student paper. That's part of that critical thinking. And some people talk about AI literacy, and I'd say information literacy in general, and AI is just a part of it. Because I also have issues with students, for example, in citations, who think they can take huge block quotes and paste them throughout their paper, and that's their paper, and they don't understand that, direct quotes should be used sparingly in AI, and you can't just paste, someone else's words for your whole paper. Even if you're quoting it, it's not plagiarism, but it's still not, your work or your ideas, and it doesn't show you understand it. I had one person that was doing a developmental psych paper where they chose to cover a certain childhood genetic condition, and a whole bunch of chemical equations ended up in that paper on balancing phosphates, which was off topic from the paper. And it was a quote from an article. They weren't using AI, they were trying to use a direct quote. But I really think with anything, it's about media literacy. I don't think AI is special in that regard. I haven't played with Gemini yet in some of those ones. Yes, and consider, does this output apply or not? Is this garbage or is this useful? Same as like if someone uses SPSS for statistical outputs, what you use in certain fourth-year statistics, you have to know what test to use and you have to know how to interpret the output. If you do the wrong test or you do a test that doesn't meet the parameters, it's going to be total bogus. Like if you, like SPSS might let you do an ANOVA on a sample of 4 people, but it's not going to mean anything. I always use the words with my students, computers have an IQ of 0. And I like how SL now puts the warnings when you're talking to a bot that you're talking to a bot, so people know. So if I logged on one of my fictional characters, it would tell me, you're talking to a bot when you talk to them, so you wouldn't think you were talking to a real 9-year-old child, which actually could create some ethical issues because real underage kids aren't allowed on the grid. So if you're doing, a classroom or a town simulation with kids, you're not talking to a real minor. I have a 9-year-old family member, and he would not be allowed on any online platform unsupervised to talk to strangers. My school-age family members, their parents only let them on Minecraft with people that they know. They don't go on public servers. So I wouldn't want thinking that my fictional characters that I created a town scenario of were actual kids. Yes. And I see it as they haven't outright banned them. They've banned anything that could be perceived as adult content with them, which I think is smart in this creepy world with all the algorithms out there. Even with things targeted towards children on other platforms. Such as people encouraging young people to upload photographs and things of themselves and extortion. There was a recent case in our city, actually. And sometimes AI and clickbait is used to lure people into those things. I also think in the child avatar community where real people are behind them, there's a lot of people that actually are underage. Sometimes, for example, you get teenagers from troubled homes who are trying to seek out a family on Second Life to get what they're lacking in real life, and that's one of the ethical concerns I have now about it as a background in educational psych. When I was new to SL, I didn't really understand that. But it's good that it's very clear you're talking to an AI versus not. However, sometimes I find the filters with Copilot will filter out stuff that's not supposed to be bad and filter it out as bad content. For example, the other day, I was simplifying some terms on brain anatomy, and I mentioned autopsy reports of people with, I think it was, let me try to remember, Parkinson's disease. And it filtered, talked about autopsies thinking I was doing something disturbing. And it was for a neuroscience course. It wasn't anything, to do with, something creepy such as necro people. Or if you were doing a medical thing such as a PowerPoint slide on puberty, let's say, Copilot might sometimes try to filter it out and say, it can't provide things on that because this contains harmful content. So I think they got to get better with their filters. And not assume because you mentioned an anatomical term that you're posting smut. Yes. Like discriminant, it could be perceived as something, or even like Maine Coon cats. Like coon has a racist term, but when I use the word, I'm referring to cats. I'm referring to a very specific breed of cats. I have 2 Maine Coon mixes. But if I type that into an AI, it's going to assume I'm being racist. Like that editing of the US government page where they tried to edit out a certain word and they started editing out people's last names. I think it's interesting times and I'm excited about AI. I'm not scared and panicking, but I think we have to keep the responsibility and critical thinking and keep humans in the driver's seat. That would be really creepy. I don't think I'd want to see those images. Or, for example, one of the people on LinkedIn, I follow a lot of professional pages on LinkedIn. She was doing research she typed, into one of the image generators to create pictures of men cleaning toilets. And it had a lot of trouble doing the images of men cleaning toilets, but did women quite well. Because it associated, those stereotypes from what it was trained in of women cleaning toilets. I like that idea of the AI-derived images of chapters. If I'm teaching a new concept to students, because I'm not really a drawer, I'll go to Adobe Firefly, which I have a subscription, and I'll generate an image to create a cartoon for the students. Such as I had a sleeping neuron to represent, a polarized neuron at rest. And, said, I'm more grumpy when I'm at rest, and it was scowling. And I was able to get the Adobe to do that image. And yes, you sometimes have to customize final ones as they'll end up with little glitches. I found spot healing and things works really well. I'm not a drawer from scratch, but I'm good at editing images. Same as when I presented my children's book to the classroom, I actually posed child avatars in this world for the images, put them in different poses on my homestead, and then edited the pictures in Photoshop. Now, this wasn't for publication, like I wouldn't be, but as for AI's image policy, you're allowed to use screenshots for fair use for educational projects. And I posterized it in Photoshop, so I wouldn't be using, by mistake, anyone's logos or anything like that. And I made sure the characters were wearing shirts with no logos, so it wasn't violating any of the trademark and trade dress rules. But if I actually publish this book, it would probably be by an educational workshop, textbook company, because it has activities with it. So I wouldn't be using screenshots anyway, because it would be up to the company what they want it to use. Yes, I found AI is terrible with text in general. Unless you're trying to simulate a toddler trying to write and you want something that's scribbled by a 3-year-old, the toddler could write their name wrong. Thank you, and I'm gonna go chase some real life animals off of things, and it was really great meeting with everyone. I sent to all my local colleagues to watch this via the stream because a lot of them, they don't go into Second Life. Have a wonderful rest of your day.